All right, on to Unit 23, the war years. We're going to look at World War II and primarily looking at how it affected America. First of all, an overview of World War II. Basically, the two sides in the war are the Axis powers, Nazi Germany, Italy, and Japan on the Axis power side, and the Allied powers, the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union, and many others. Those tend to be the big three on the Allied side. It starts in 1940 after 10 years of aggressive expansion by Italy, Germany, and Japan in the 1930s. Japan invades China and parts of Asia. Germany is starting in and around Central Europe and taking over what it feels is rightfully it was lands taken from World War I, where Germanic speakers are. It starts there and expands. Italy had invaded Ethiopia. And so you have really three aggressive nations during the 1930s. Most of the 1930s, Europe follows a policy of appeasement towards Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, particularly. What appeasement means is that the European nations, like Britain, allowed them to take over other countries really without penalty. They would meet with Hitler, say, "What are you doing?" Hitler would tell them he wouldn't do it again. They would believe him, and soon he would do it again. And this kind of pattern follows throughout the late 1930s. Trying to understand why you would appease Hitler on the other side was really the experience of World War I. A lot of the West was war-weary, was conflict-weary, and basically just wanted the bullies to go away and would give them little pieces of conquest, and unfortunately that didn't stop them. By 1940, Hitler had eventually conquered most of Europe. During this time, the United States did not really get involved in the war until it was attacked directly by Japan at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii on December 7th, 1941. Even though FDR privately saw, I think, the U.S. going into the war, was trying to get the American public more open to that idea. We were financially helping the British a lot in the war effort, but still didn't directly get involved until Pearl Harbor. FDR was the president for most of the war. He served an unprecedented 4 terms as president. He's the only president in history to serve more than 2, and he dies in 1945 during his 4th term. Vice President Harry Truman will become the president after FDR's death and has to make several crucial decisions at the end of the war, including the decision to drop atomic bombs on 2 cities in Japan. Harry Truman was relatively unknown. He was the choice for FDR as vice president in his last term, and then is thrust into these really huge decisions. So that's a basic overview of the war in general. We'll get more specific on how the unit covers things that you need to know. First of all, in reference to FDR serving 4 terms, I'd mentioned in the previous slide that he was the only president in history to serve more than 2 terms. Now, at the time, that was not a law. Presidents could technically run for a 3rd term. But all of them leading up to FDR had stepped down after 2 terms. Why, you might ask? Well, the precedent was set by our first president, George Washington. He had a famous farewell speech in which he talked about, many things, kind of warned America what he saw as being problems moving forward. One of those problems is he felt that serving more than 2 terms, serving more than 8 years as president, would give one man too much power and would be too much of a threat to tyranny, which they had just fought against in leaving Britain. So he thought that the future presidents should step down after 2 terms, and all the other presidents in history agreed, except for FDR. He breaks this tradition as he runs for a third term in 1940. With events getting tense in Europe, with Hitler and the Nazis, invasion of multiple nations, and the Great Depression still not being over, FDR believed it would be harmful to the United States for a new president to serve. So that was kind of his side of breaking this tradition that had existed for close to 200 years at that time. FDR wanted a chance to complete his New Deal vision for the Depression. And if you look at the results, the American people weren't too upset at him breaking this term, obviously because of his landslide victories in both 1940 and 1944. He will defeat a former Democrat turned Republican, Wendell Willkie from Indiana in 1940 very handily, and then he will defeat Thomas Dewey in 1944. Now, transitioning back to the war and how it all kind of plays out. Early, with Hitler being appeased and allowed to get into or invade and keep lands or have greater control over places like Austria and Czechoslovakia, eventually the world sees Hitler kind of conquering most of Europe. The world, in fact, would be a very different place today if it wasn't for the nation of Britain in all of this. He had basically conquered all of Europe except for Britain by 1940. And Britain was the only major power that was really unconquered, well, along with the Soviet Union. And that's another story in a future slide here. So Hitler turns his attention on Britain. If he could take over Britain, he's pretty much got a free reign of at least Western Europe, if not all of Europe. And he causes major damage to the nation because of this. However, we see the emergence of the great leader Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of Britain, who leads a resilient resistance that Churchill, in fact, in a famous speech, pleaded to his people would never surrender. One of the first major victories for Churchill was the Battle of Dunkirk, and it wasn't much of a battle as much as more of an evacuation. See, the Nazis had closed in on British troops in France as they conquered France, and Churchill organizes a heroic rescue by mostly civilian British vessels on the shores of France. There's a good movie out about or showing exactly, a depiction of how Dunkirk was. But I mean, imagine private citizens sailing across the channel to France to save British soldiers, bring them back to the country. So Dunkirk becomes a theme of never surrender for Churchill and the British versus the Nazis. So I want to give some more details on the Battle of Britain as we just kind of talked about Dunkirk, and I made some references to it. Again, after easily invading and occupying France in 1940, Britain and Russia were really the only obstacles to Hitler's complete control of the European continent. He focuses first on Britain. Now, he had a non-aggression pact with the Soviets over the invasion of Poland, so they both had promised each other they wouldn't invade each other or go to war with each other. So he begins bombing Britain unceasingly from July to October of 1940. Churchill, the new prime minister in Britain, nicknamed the British Bulldog for his efforts in World War II and his important symbolism and leadership. He becomes an important resistance figure. In one of his famous speeches, as I said in the previous slide, he declared Britain would never surrender. Also, after major bombing campaigns, Churchill could be found hiding with citizens in the subways, and after the bombing, he was famous for walking openly out into the city to assess the damage and to talk with, citizens and really try to encourage them. The battle pitted Hitler's tough Luftwaffe, the German name for the German Air Force, versus Britain's famous RAF, or the Royal Air Force. In the end, Churchill was correct. Britain would never surrender despite massive damage and death to its nations during these months in 1940. And the British people's ability to withstand that onslaught was a major turning point in the war against the Nazis. Hitler never seriously attempted a land invasion of Britain, and by 1942, the Americans are in the war, becoming an important ally on the side of the British. So I can't, emphasize enough how important it was for Britain to have the resolve and to, like their famous leader said, never surrender to the Germans. After helping Britain financially from 1939 to 1941, FDR was secretly preparing for entering the war. Japan makes that easy for us on December 7th, 1941, when it attacks us at Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor was our Pacific hub, our most important military base in the Pacific region on the island of Hawaii, which will later become a state in our country. And the Japanese were hoping by attacking Pearl Harbor that they would inflict enough damage on our vessels, our planes, our troops and such that we wouldn't be able to initiate war. I think Japan saw the writing on the wall. We had had some conflict with them over their aggression in China and different places. We were refusing to trade with them. They relied a lot on our oil. There was a lot of reasons why they attacked us, but strategically they were wanting to really kind of render us useless by inflicting damage at our base. When that happens, December 7th, 1941, Roosevelt will deliver a speech to the nation in which he announces our entry into the war. A date that will live in infamy is an important part of the speech that you may hear. But basically, he not only declares war on Japan, but we declare war on their allies, Germany and Italy, so the Axis powers. There was near unanimous support for the war. There was one interesting, notable exception. Representative Jeanette Rankin, who had been the first woman elected to Congress, voted against America joining the war, but she was definitely the exception and not the rule. One of the most controversial actions of FDR during the war was his Executive Order 9066. Executive orders are presidential decrees that help officers and agencies of the president's executive branch manage the operations within the federal government itself. But if you think about that, it basically is having the same impact as a law, and you don't need congressional approval to invoke an executive order. So although Congress can technically pass legislation that blocks that order, they would need to have enough votes to override a veto. So executive order is kind of something where the president is acting individually. In this case, 9066, he instructs his Secretary of War to deport Japanese Americans. These are meaning full American citizens. So not only ones that were maybe here visiting, but actual American citizens of Japanese descent, and put them in intern camps on the West Coast, which he thought was in a threat. There was a major threat of a Japanese invasion. So FDR thought in his mind this was a safety issue protecting America. Opponents then and through history, though, saw it as a discriminatory, unconstitutional act that based a governmental action on one's ethnicity. And in fact, about 40 years later, during the 1980s, the U.S. will officially admit that being wrong and give small reparation payments to survivors of those who were interned. So it's another kind of important lesson, too, that presidents have extended powers, that our rights can be suppressed during a time of war in the name of safety. And you can see this is a blatant disregard to our Constitution, but that's not necessarily the rule during a time of war.